see the walls in there? That's the wall around St. Molua's graveyard in South County Limerick, and we're heading in there. Hoping this is recording. This is John Tierney from the Historic Graves Project, and we're going around as part of a Ballyhour development funded project. We recorded headstones in these graveyards, and now we're coming in just to show the general public what we found. This is an unusual graveyard because, not unique, but unusual because the graveyard is 2 fields in. So if you're going across to visit, you've got to go across the fields. It's private land, so you need permission, but because the graveyard is still in use, they're used to 1 or 2 cars being parked near the graveyard. So let's open him. Close him again. When we were here, David White was here, one of the Ballyhour lads, and I remember he wasn't being chased by cattle, but they were certainly close up behind him. I remember laughing at his face. This graveyard is important for me because this is where my own grandparents are buried. And when we were young, Grandad died, and we didn't go to his graveyard. Children in Ireland didn't go to funerals a lot then. Whereas when Granny died, I remember big crowd. It had been lashing rain, so the fields were wet, and we had a load of jeeps and all that, and all the crowd were brought in the jeeps, and then we shouldered the coffin. I can't remember, it was from over yonder. It might well have been all the way through this field and shouldered all the way up here as well. And it was kind of wild. There was a real sense of sadness on my aunts and cousins and all crying and everything. It was like, I remember saying years later to my mother, like, oh, Granny had made it that, and she said, oh, she would have loved all the drama. So that's my memories of here. As an archaeologist, I find the site interesting as well, not just because our own people are buried here, but there's other things, there's lots going on in here, including where it's located. That here, that's the Ballyhour Hills, and in the foreground, exactly, I'm afraid of overstating it, but up there is the Cush complex. It's a very well known archaeological group of earthworks. So there's a lot of early medieval archaeology in this area, and potentially we're quite early here. Like the wall looks just like where we were earlier in Ardkilmartin, and you'll see it a lot in County Limerick graveyards, these stone walls around them. But if you stick on your archaeologist glasses, and here in the foreground there's actually a wee ditch across there. So I'm now walking over towards an earthwork. These minor undulations here, it's harder to see now that I'm in it. I think I'm actually in a ditch now, which surrounds this. So if you look at the aerial photographs, there's actually a big curvilinear earthwork now ploughed out around this rectangular graveyard. You'll recognise the kissing gate there, similar to what we saw in Ardkilmartin, and then the coffin rest as you go into the graveyard. And here we are, it's a February afternoon, and we're facing east. All these headstones have their backs to us, and they're facing east. And small enough, but it's packed full of really interesting things, including, where's my finger? In through there, right through there, there's an amazing feature that we found last year, that we identified last year. There's the church. I have our notes here. The graveyard, the townland is Balline, but the graveyard is called St. Molua's graveyard, so Molua is the local saint. And we're not sure if there was one Molua who was commemorated all over the country, or if there were multiple individuals. But there's a few little pockets where the saint was known locally. Killaloe in County Clare, there's a St. Molua's Archery. Near where I'm living now, near Kinslabeg, County Water, there's a Kilmaloo. And here, St. Molua's, this graveyard. And when Mum and Dad are coming over here, we used to be cutting the grass and visiting the grave. Our family grave is over there. Let's say we're going over to Maloo. But there would have been a church in here, a medieval parish church of some form, and dedicated to St. Molua in the historic documents by the 14th century. And the first reference to it is in 1185, when there was a grant of a church. The Maloo is also associated with the older Celtic mythology relating to Lug or Lugad. But that's not really my sphere of knowledge. These two features here are what we discovered. See that stone there, and that wee one there. And there's something very interesting going on with these. This time last year almost, last spring, we buried my Uncle Pat over there, and I was standing at the back of the crowd, and as I was looking back over this way, I said, crikey, what's that? Because I'd passed this a few times, but I just hadn't recognised it. And what it turned out to be is a sundial. So that hole there is the Gnomon hole. So it's now being reused as a grave marker, but probably 1,000 years old. Would have originally been south facing, and there would have been a rod or something sticking out of that, and the shadow cast by that on the sundial would have told the time for prayers for a religious community here. And then what we have here, which now I look at it, is a cross. Is it a cross inscribed? What have we got there? This is very shaped. We don't get a lot of these in graveyards, and if we do, I think they tend to be in sites with a medieval association, and I think this is one of those. Do you see the way it's rounded? It's very thick and smooth, but it's not been dressed in a modern fashion. And there is a plain inscribed cross on it. There's a wee hole there. I'm not sure if that's original. But this to me feels like potentially like an early medieval cross slab or grave marker of some description. It doesn't feel like the post-medieval ones that we see all over the country. And I think it being here adjacent to that fella, just potentially we have indications of an early monastic site with the curvilinear enclosure all around it and related earthworks. And then over yonder outside there's Maloo's Holy Well. So early medieval indicators, we only identified him last year with the Ballyhowra team. After we had the funeral for Uncle Pat, we came back and did the survey, and we're fairly happy then. And we ran it by the main sundial guy in Ireland. Is it Michael Hartley? Am I right? MJ Harley, yeah, he's based up in County Derry, and I think he came down and confirmed that we do have one of 12, only 12 sundials in the whole country. So interesting. Within the graveyard then, the local names that are commemorated here: Harrington, Carey, my own gang; Collins is Maher, Burke, Sheehy, McAuliffe, Cleary, O'Regan, Clancy, Began, Brennan, Wallace, Foley, Keogh. There's Tierney's here too, which is my name. Here he is. And this little heart-shaped stone that Mum and Dad put up for a neighbour of Mum's, Matt Brennan, who was a lovely gent who we knew when we were children, and he taught us a number of the old style things. I remember he made a bird trap out of twigs with little bits of string that would auto trigger. So if a little bird landed on it, the trap would shut down and catch the bird. So he had some of the old country ways, and that's Matt there. I always remember he used to pick us up by, you'd not pick up by the scruff of our neck, he used to pick up by our locks of our heads. He'd grab you by the lock of the head and he could lift you off the ground. He was a very gentleman now, and he wasn't at all rough, but he had some trick for doing that kind of thing. Yeah, look at these. I think these are potentially the remnant stones of something to do with the medieval church. And this cross stone there, that looks to me like the cross is being used. The tradition of the Holy Well across the field there involves making a couple of rounds, one around the well and one here in the graveyard, and inscribing crosses, and that looks to me like it had crosses inscribed on it. And now I think this explains this one to me. We were talking about this earlier with Martha, and I think what this is the local community knew that this was an ancient stone, and this is one of their inscribed cross stones. Oh, and look now, we've seen this elsewhere. We've seen this elsewhere on headstones up in the north, and we're interpreting similar features, maybe not the same as this now, as little candle holders. I'm not sure about that now, but there's a slight potential to that anyway. So there's a lot of medieval things going on here, and that's what surprises me. For us as a family, it's an important graveyard because it's where Granny and Grandad are buried, and Grandad's father. When we were doing the survey, we did the numbering here one day, and then the next day we were recording the headstones. And that iron cross, we put a number on it and we recorded it. Look at it, an iron cross, a ringing cross made by a local blacksmith, and the trefoil decoration, ornamentation at the end. Very nice. But the next day my parents came in when we were doing the survey, and my mum says, oh, that's Gala's headstone. So that's my great-grandfather's, iron cross. That was originally on our family grave, where the white marble is now. And then when Gran and Grandad put up that white stone, they put the iron cross in the wall, and then it's used here for marking somebody else's grave. So it's just, for all the headstones we've recorded on the project, that here was one that was from my own family. It was quite moving. And then the other thing too, and I must confirm it with my mother, but she knows the blacksmith who made that, and that brings us into the whole heritage of blacksmiths in this county. Some of the blacksmith families have been on the go for hundreds of years. Some of them are tied way back into the 1790s with the story of the 1798, and people like the Staker Wallace, who we've covered in other videos, and we'll be talking about elsewhere. So the presence of a hawthorn tree here, he's quite extensive. It looks like he's been coppiced or cut at the base, so I think he's there a long time. Remember I mentioned Tierney's? This is a Tierney memorial there, but it's not my branch of the Tierney's, so it's different. It's just my mum and the Careys who are buried here. Peaceful, one of the nicest settings in the graveyard ever. The previous generation to these Careys are buried up in Ardpatrick. And we have a Joseph Bolster headstone up there for Andrew Carey. The first of our gang to be buried in here was also an Andrew Carey so the one in Ardpatrick was 1817. This one I think was 1969 when Gala died, which was Andrew. He was the man who was shot by Crown forces, I think it was in 1921, while he was breaking curfew playing cards. So I'm not going to go into the same kind of detail here looking at the older headstones. I just kind of keep focus on the medieval stuff. And there's one more key medieval point that I want to make, and we're just going to go outside the gate to try and make that. So that's Cush up there. Ardpatrick is at the far end of the hills, way over there, I say 8-9 miles away, which was a big early monastic site, the round tower and all that kind of carry on. A key routeway between County Cork and County Limerick. I think this is part of a network of sites in these rich lowlands of County Limerick. And let's see, can I see that ditch better? Part of an older ecclesiastical enclosure. Yeah, those undulations in there. This low ground here, they're archaeological features. And then there's something marked on the 1840s maps here outside the graveyard wall. This clump of hawthorn and what is it? Nettles. There's stand of stones in there. It's marked as a stone cist, or stone graves are a cist, C-I-S-T, on the Ordnance Survey map. And one potential for it is that it's within the carving enclosure all around us here. So it's within the potential ecclesiastical enclosure. So it might actually be a structure relating to a saint's grave or relating to an eminent person's grave. We've never had a look at it, we've never given it a clean. So it might be due a bit of an inspection if we're not allowed. We'd have to get onto National Monument Service to do that. But that one feature there alone, we rarely get something like that on our graveyard sites. And because it's out here inside potential early medieval enclosure, it has the potential to tie in this whole site with that early medieval period. Of course, we might find that it's just a clearance cairn, but if it's on the 1840s map marked as stone graves, that means there's folklore associated with it. So these fields around here, it's in the parish of Brennan. If you've seen the video for Ardkilmartin, that was in the townland of Ballygrennan. This graveyard is in the parish of Brennan, and the both ending the same with Grennan, which Oscuelga could be a personal name, it could be a surname, O'Drainon, the Drennans, as it became anglicised, or it could be Drainon as in blackthorn tree. So we're looking over, can you see that white well? She's going to lash now, so I think we'll do a separate video on the white well at a different date. But that's Molua's, that's the enclosure, or sorry, that's the Holy Well of St. Molua, which according to Westrup was one of the best observed rounds pattern days for any holy well in Limerick, and that's saying something because the holy wells in Limerick have a huge following still to this day. Oh, look at that now. So there's red sandstone at the base of that wall. So the geology of the place is in the blood of the place. Here's what I mean by, see that brick slope just here? So that's an archaeological feature there. That's an archaeological break of slope. I'm now inside the enclosure and now gone down into the curving ditch, and I'm walking up the other side out of the enclosure. So the enclosure curves through there out into the field and encloses where those rocks were that were marked as stone graves. And there's the rectilinear, I'd love if there was documentation to show us who built these stone walls and the graves. Lots going on here. When the farmers, all the local families come, I think it's early August, to observe the pattern day. The feast day is 3rd to 4th of August. So all the local families come to the Holy Well, but they don't come necessarily by road. If they can, they'll come across the fields. And those old paths across the fields are the old walking pathways that people like my grandparents and great-grandparents would have used as they were travelling between farms and between towns and villages and so on. They knew all these fields, they knew all the paths across the fields. And particularly here, what you'll see, this is really good land, I think, very fertile, but it's all deeply drained. There are very deep drainage ditches all around these fields, and that's tied in with the river, the Morning Star River, with the drainage of Morning Star River, which was, I think it hasn't really been studied, but there's a whole, by draining the Morning Star and its hinterlands, they actually made all this even richer land. And that's tied in here. The spring of the Holy Well, I think, is feeding into a wee stream which feeds into the Morning Star. And Sour, I think it is Oscuelga, a beautiful name for a river, naming a river after a star in the morning. And then Molua is tied in with that. If you're going into the older Celtic myths and all that kind of stuff, then Lug being associated with Molua, I don't know how many saints were Molua, I don't know. Is this definitely an early medieval ecclesiastical site? I suspect so. with those large sandstone blocks inside, and with the sundial. Where else did we see a sundial? I'm trying to remember. No, it won't come to me. And the hill above having the Cush complex and the earthworks up there. A very rich area, not overly visited by tourists, not overly famous outside the county, but the people who come from here are very deeply aware of its importance and its rich heritage. And now, having the team, Martha and Juliana, having done research on the graveyard and pointing out about the crosses, I think I now understand a bit better about two of the crosses that we have carved inside. So that was an interesting visit for me in that sense. So potentially the corner of Cowellshire, medieval church there, sundial over there, maybe a medieval grave marker in there, and then the earthwork around us. And then here behind us, the stone graves, whatever they are. The closest thing that's coming to mind for me, oh, I'm not saying it is, but maybe a shrine grave, maybe something else rougher altogether. It'd be interesting to see if we can actually explore that without damaging it. And look at them, the beautiful show of daffodils. Oh, they're miniature, so I'd say somebody planted them, or else they're escapes out of the graveyard. And that's where we are in the February in Ireland, and a fairly mild February so far. If you're coming, tracing your family tree, go to historicgraves.com, click on explore, and then click on names, and you can type in the surnames that you're following. In my case, Carey, Collins, Tierney, and you can specify, you can just do the whole country, or you can specify a particular graveyard and just click on search, or apply it actually, and then it'll show you anywhere we get those surnames. You click on the gravestone and then you right click on that and you can see the details of it, and it'll show you exactly where to go to find that gravestone. Print out the gravestone record, and then when you go into the graveyard you can go in and find what are potentially your family graves. And all of that information of, I don't know, what is it, 250,000 headstones, are put there by local community groups like we worked with here in Ballyhora. People who spend 2 and 3 days in each graveyard, sometimes 2 and 3 weeks. We put a number in every headstone, we fill out a record sheet for every headstone. During lockdown we didn't do full record sheets because we didn't always have a full team, or a big enough team, so we would have done 1 name, 1 day, 2 names, 2 dates. But all of that data is done by community groups, all with the purpose of saying, look, this is us, this is our people, we're buried here, and then if the diaspora has gone abroad and if they want to come home, to help them to find where they came from as well. So very deliberate action for us as archaeologists. It's an archaeological project. For a lot of our volunteers, it's a sign of pride really for the communities that they're part of, and it's also a genealogical local historical project. Okay, so you can park outside at that gate as well and walk all across 2 fields if you want. I'll say goodbye for now from Balline, St. Molua's graveyard, South County Limerick. Slán go fóill.